Every soul in this empire is allowed exactly one beast, so why do beasts that don't exist in any registry answer to me? The crystal cracks warm under my palm, and 2 eggs fall, not one. Over them, 4 words light up that no proctor in this hall has ever read aloud: Fusion Tamer. The examiner calls it a defect. He stamps me F rank while the whole hall laughs. 1 beast a soul is the law of the empire. A second bond means seizure, a burned out mark. I say nothing. I pocket both eggs. That night I press them together just to see. The shells run like wax and seal into 1-2 heartbeats inside. Something with scales and feathers taps at the shell from within. Every tamer born in this empire has a ceiling. I was born with a blueprint. The morning it happened, I had expected nothing at all. The awakening hall was a vaulted rotunda of polished stone. 1 cracked crystal stood on the dais, older than the empire's name. Every citizen touches it once, at 17. It reads your soul and hands you 1 egg. That egg is your rank, your trade, your whole life. I was a stable hand's son. I expected a load beast or a cur. Something low, something legible. In the empire, a person is worth the beast bonded to their soul, and everyone knew what a stable boy was worth before I ever touched the stone. You awaken once, at 17, and the beast you get is your rank, your trade, and your standing for the rest of your life. There is no second draw, there is no appeal. Whatever the crystal hands you, you carry to the grave, so I wasn't hoping for much. I was hoping to not be noticed. A boy who has learned to take up no space learns to want small things. The line moved. Rich cadets went first, in oiled coats and collars, the sons and daughters of houses that owned bloodlines older than the streets I mucked. Their crystals lit clean and quiet. 1 egg each, glowing on the stone, and a class name floating above it that everyone in the vaulted rotunda could read. Beastrider, Houndmaster, Warden. The hall clapped for each, the polite clap of people confirming a thing they already knew about the world. Then it was my turn. I set my palm on the crystal. It went warm, too warm, then hot. The light under my hand did not settle. It doubled. 2 eggs rolled out onto the stone. The hall went quiet, the way a room goes quiet before it laughs. Above the eggs, letters burned into the air. Not a class anyone had trained me to expect. 2 words, no proctor there had ever read from that stone. Fusion Tamer. The head examiner leaned in. He was old and thin and sure of himself. He read the words twice and his face closed like a ledger. Broken awakening, he said, loud, for the room. The crystal split. 2 shells, no rank. He picked up his brand and pressed it to my wrist. F rank. Defect. The iron was cold, not hot. That is how you know it means nothing. The mark it left was thin and gray. The hall laughed then. I heard it from every tier. His crystal broke. That's not a class, that's a defect. 2 eggs and no rank. The boy awakened backwards. The examiner was already turning away, but he said the rest for the record, the way you recite a rule so no one can claim they weren't told. 1 beast per soul. That is the law of the empire. His voice carried flat and final. A second bond is a crime. We seize the beasts. We burn the mark off the wrist. There is no appeal and no exception. He glanced at the 2 eggs by my foot. Take your defect egg and go. 1 shell, boy. You'll register 1 shell. He'd already decided the second was garbage from a broken stone. I looked at the 2 eggs. I looked at the crowd looking at me. I did not argue. Arguing is a thing you do when the room might side with you. I bent, and I picked up both eggs and I put them inside my coat. Nobody stopped a defect from pocketing his own broken shells. Why would they? They were trash. I walked out with my head down and my heart going hard. Sarah caught me on the steps outside. She'd awakened an hour before me. A mid-rank hound, a good result, a real one, the kind a branch family drowning in debt prays for. She still had her family's old finery on, let out at the seams and re-hemmed, warm dusty rose that had been fine once and was trying hard to still look it. Her honey blonde hair was fussed back the way she always wore it when she wanted to seem like more than the ledger allowed. We'd trained beside each other since we were 9, mucked the same stalls, learned beasts from the same old handler. She was the one person in that whole laughing hall who hadn't laughed. Roan, she fell into step, quiet, careful. 2 eggs, I saw. A cracked crystal, I said. You heard the examiner. I heard him. She studied my face, the way she used to when we were small, and she was deciding whether to believe me. You don't look like a boy who broke. I made myself shrug. I look like a stable boy, same as yesterday. She let it go. She always knew when I'd shut a door. But her eyes went to my coat, to the shape of 2 eggs where there should have been 1, and something behind them started thinking. I felt it and I filed it away. Even then, some part of me knew, the people who know you best are the ones who can read you when you'd rather they didn't. We parted at the academy gate. I went to the stables, where I belonged. That night I couldn't sleep. Greywarden Academy stables smelled of straw and iron and warm animal. I had a corner in the feedloft that was mine because no one else wanted it. I lit no lamp. I took the 2 eggs out and set them in the straw and looked at them for a long time. 1 shell, the examiner had said. Register 1. But the crystal hadn't broken. I'd felt it read me. 2 eggs. And the class name, Fusion Tamer. And I was 17 and stupid and I wanted to know what it meant. So I pressed the 2 eggs together. Just to see. I felt them resist and then give. The shells ran soft under my hands, like wax held near a flame. The 2 curves flowed into each other and sealed shut. Where there had been 2 eggs there was one, larger, warm, its surface swirled with 2 colors that hadn't been there before. I put my ear against it. 2 heartbeats, fast and out of time with each other, then falling into step. I sat very still in the dark and understood that I had done something the law had a specific punishment for. I had bonded a second beast. Worse, I had made one that shouldn't exist. The shell moved. All night it moved, a slow rocking in the straw. Toward dawn it began to crack. I cupped my hands around it without deciding to. Something tapped at the shell from the inside. Once. Twice. A third time, harder. Then it broke and I saw what I'd made. It was the size of my boot, a raptor's frame, folded wet and new. Down one flank ran overlapping scales, dark as slate. Down the other, storm gray feathers, soft and damp. A crest ran back from its skull, and along that crest a thin blue-white charge crackled and died, and crackled again, like the air before lightning. Scales and feathers. On one body. There was no page in any bestiary in the Empire for that. I had cleaned enough noble stables to have seen the stud books. I knew every profile a soul could bond. This was none of them. For one breath it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Awe went through me like cold water. Then, in the same breath, the fear arrived. Because I understood exactly what I was holding. Not a beast. A crime, with a heartbeat. A creature that no registry stamp would ever fit, that any honest witness could describe in one sentence to end me. Every person who saw it clearly was a person who could burn the mark off my wrist and cage what I'd made. Wonder and dread, together, in the straw before sunrise. The hatchling looked up at me and made a small sound, and the charge on its crest brightened, and it leaned into my hands like it already knew whose they were. Ashwing, I said, before I'd thought about it. The name just fit. I didn't get to sit with the wonder long. 3 days later, the registry ran a spot inspection on the academy stables. They do it without warning, that's the point. Inspector Verrill came through the doors with his ledger in hand, a weathered man in registry gray who read each stall the way a customs officer reads a manifest, not cruel. Thorough, which, for a boy with contraband under his coat, is worse. I had Ashwing bundled against my chest, still and small, breathing against me. I kept mucking a stall. I kept my eyes down. I took up no space. Beryl worked down the row, checking marks against beasts against the ledger. He was 2 stalls away from me when it went wrong. At the far end of the yard, the drill master's beast broke its tether. It was a feral-tempered drill beast, a heavy thing bred for the sparring circuit, and something spooked it. It came down the center of the stables at a dead run, straight through the inspection, straight at the nearest soft target, me. There was no time to move. It closed the distance in 3 strides, jaws wide, mid-lunge. Ashwing came out of my coat before I knew I'd let go. 3 days old and the size of a boot, it dropped into the straw between me and the drill beast. The charge on its crest snapped white. Then it loosed a storm burst, a crack of blue lightning no bigger than a dinner plate, but concentrated, precise, straight into the drill beast's open mouth. The big animal folded mid-lunge. It hit the ground a foot from my boots and did not get up. The whole yard had gone silent. Verrill stood at the end of the row, ledger open, staring at a dead drill beast and a boy in the straw. His eyes moved to me, to the small shape scrambling back under my coat. I turned my body, slow, casual, and it was gone from sight. What put it down? Verrill said. Guard beast, sir, I heard myself say. My voice came out calm. Under pressure I get calmer, not louder. I learned that early. One of the yards ran off after. Verrill looked at the drill beast, at the scorch on the roof of its mouth. He had not seen the shape clearly, he had seen a flash and a result. His pen hovered. A yard guard beast, he repeated, flat. Yes, sir, he wrote it down. A thorough man writes down the answer that fits when he has no better one. But I watched him look at that scorch 1 second too long before he moved on, and I knew he had not forgotten it. At the door, before he left, he read the notice aloud to the room, the way the examiner had read the law, so no one could say they weren't warned. Annual rank inspection is set for the season's end, Verrill said. Every registered tamer is assessed. A tamer who holds F rank and never advances is removed from the rolls. His gray eyes passed over me once. The registry does not carry defects forever. Then he was gone. I stood in the straw with a dead drill beast at my feet, and the greatest secret in the Empire breathing against my chest. I registered Ashwing that afternoon, as my single defect egg, the 1 shell the examiner said I'd get. 1 line in the ledger. 1 beast, F rank, no note. The inspectors credited the kill to a guard beast and never looked again. I had a class no proctor could read, a creature no bestiary contained, and a mark on my wrist that said I was worth nothing. And now I had a clock. A defect who never ranks up gets cold from the rolls. Veril had said it to the room, but he'd said it to me. I was holding the one thing that could change everything, in a system built to catch anyone who did. And the season's end was already counting down. The alley cur was fast, but it was hungry, and hunger makes a beast predictable. I ran it 2 streets down through the capital's lower quarter, past the tannery and the closed stalls, until it cornered itself in a dead-end court. It turned, ribs heaving, teeth bared, a stray with a fleet strain in its blood. I'd seen it in how it moved, the long reach of its gait. That was why I wanted it. I crouched. I held up the scrap I'd carried for an hour. I didn't grab. You don't grab. Easy, I said. I'm not the guard. It took the scrap. Then it took my hand's smell, and my stillness, and after a while it let me set my palm on its neck. This is the part no house understands, because a house buys its beasts and never has to learn them. You don't take a stray by being stronger. You take it by being the first thing in its whole hungry life that didn't want something from it. I wanted the fleet strain in its blood, but the cur didn't need to know that. It only needed to know my hand was still. The bond took like a knot pulling tight, a small, warm click behind my breastbone. Second beast. Third, if you counted right, illegal 3 times over and quiet as a held breath. That was the loop now. I couldn't rank up. A defect who advances draws exactly the eyes I couldn't afford. But a defect still has to eat, and Ashwing eats twice what I do. So I grew the only way the law couldn't see, 1 stray at a time, off the books, in the dark. I took the cur back to the loft. I already had a stray there, a lean thing with a courier hound's build, tamed a week before. 2 beasts on the straw, both mine, both unregistered. I put a hand on each. This was the part the examiner said I couldn't do. I pressed the bond between them the way I'd pressed the eggs. Not with my hands this time, with the mark on my wrist, with whatever the class was that lived behind it. The 2 beasts leaned toward each other, their outlines went soft. Then they ran together like water finding water, and where 2 animals had lain, there was one, curled small and new. My wrist caught fire. The Tamer mark on my wrist scarred a shade darker, not cold like the brand, but hot, a deep ache that ran up to the elbow and stayed. I gripped it and breathed through my teeth. So that was the price. The examiner's iron had meant nothing. This meant something. Every fusion would leave its mark on me, right there where anyone could read it, a tally I couldn't wash off. And both the strays were gone, spent into the new thing. I'd raised that cur for an hour and the courier hound a week, and now they were one animal that would have to grow up from the start. It uncurled. Longer in the leg than either parent, a deeper chest, a set to its eyes that said it already understood roads. Not a hound, and not a cur. Something the guild had no word for. It cost me 2 beasts and a scar to make. But it would earn. The first run proved it. A merchant needed a sealed packet across the capital before the guild's runners could, and paid extra for the impossible. I set my courier beast down the length of the main boulevard at dusk. It didn't run like an animal. It flowed. Long, low, eating ground in a way that made the guild's best fleet hounds look like they were waiting. The guild had entered its own runners on the same route, proud stock, generations of breeding in their legs. My courier passed 2 of them on the bridge without seeming to try. It passed the 3rd at the customs gate, and the runner's handler actually shouted, thinking his beast had thrown a shoe, because there was no other way to explain being overtaken like that. It reached the far quarter before the guild runner had cleared the halfway post, and it came back to me with the merchant's seal and no one able to say what breed it was. Coin arrived. More than a stable hand sees in a season. I hid most of it and I fed Ashwing, who was no longer boot-sized, who ate like a growing storm. But a beast nobody can name is a story, and stories travel. There's a runner nobody's seen, I heard in the market. Passed the guild's best like they were tied to a post. Whose is it? Nobody's, I wanted to say. Everybody stay home. But rumor is a leak, and I'd sprung it myself. Pell found me before the coin was even cold. He was 18, broad as a door, sun-browned, with a plain load beast that loved him, and a grin that had never learned caution. He was stable assigned, like me. Unlike everyone else, he'd never once bought the defect act. That was yours. He didn't ask. He dropped onto the straw beside me, delighted. The runner. Everyone's talking. That was your beast. I don't have a beast worth talking about, I said. I'm F rank. That's the joke though, isn't it? He leaned in, dropping his voice to a whisper the whole loft could have heard. You're not a defect. I've watched you with the strays. You've got something. Enter the sparring circuit. Stop hiding it. Let them see. Let them see, I repeated. You'd wipe the floor. You'd make them eat every defect they ever said. He was right about the destination. He was so wrong about the road that it scared me. Let them see was the exact thing that ended in a burned wrist and a caged Ashwing. Pell wanted me to win. He didn't know that winning, seen, was the same as losing everything. I muck stalls, I told him. That's the extent of my gift. You said so yourself, first week. I was wrong first week. He got up, still grinning, still loud, still dangerous without meaning a bit of it. You'll get there. I'll be there when you do. He left. I sat with the quiet after him and felt the size of the thing I couldn't say. That was the cost nobody warned me about, not the mark. The lie. Pell wanted to stand beside me in the sun and be proud of me out loud. The kindest thing I could do for him was keep him at arm's length. A friend who knew what I was became a friend. The registry could burn for it. Every warm thing he offered, I had to meet with the harmless defect face and turn a little colder than I felt. Hiding doesn't just cost you the fights you don't take. It costs you the people who'd stand in them with you. I was 17 and surrounded and completely alone, and the loneliness was the price of the secret as surely as the scar was the price of the fusion. Sarah was across the loft, brushing down her overgroomed hound, close enough to have heard all of it. She watched me tell Pell a smooth, easy lie and not stumble once. Her amber eyes moved from my face to my wrist to my face again. You gotten good at that, she said quietly. At what? Saying nothing that's true. It wasn't an accusation. It was almost sad. You never used to be able to lie to me. I'm not lying to you, I said, and that was a lie too, and we both heard it land. She looked at me a moment longer, and then she went back to her hound, but something had shifted behind her eyes, not against me, not yet. Just the beginning of a question she hadn't decided to ask. I was so busy hiding from the registry that I forgot the danger was never only the men in gray. It was the one person who'd known me before the mask. The noble cadet cornered me 2 days later in the stable yard in front of everyone. He was a house son with a collar that cost more than my year, and he'd heard the rumor, and he decided a defect making the guild look slow was an insult to men like him. He walked his beast up to me while I carried feed and knocked the buckets out of my hands. Careful, stable boy, he said loud. Don't let the real tamers see you holding a beast. The yard laughed on cue. They say you've got a runner. F rank's got a secret champion, let's test it. He set his hand on his mount's collar. It was a B-rank beast, armored, low, a real fighter, the kind of house buys to win circuit ribbons. He turned it to face me. Match, he said. Right here, you and your mystery beast. Or forfeit, and I'll have the proctors strike your name for cowardice on top of defect. His smile widened. Fight or lose the roles, defect, your choice. There was no choice, and he knew it. Refuse and I was culled. Fight and I was seen, so I chose the third thing. The thing only I could do. I had 2 more strays hidden in the loft, stock I'd tamed and not yet spent. A low armored ridgeback and a lean pit strain with jaws. I'd never meant to fuse them under a crowd. But the cadet's B rank was already moving, and calm is the only speed I have when it counts. I reached back into the loft with the bond, both hands on the mark, and I fused them where they stood. It hurt worse than the first time. The mark seared, my vision whited at the edges, the scar on my wrist deepened another shade. But out of the loft came the new thing, and it hit the yard at a run. Low, armored across the shoulders like the ridgeback. Jaws and dry from the pit strain. But faster than either, angled wrong for how heavy it looked, a profile that stopped the laughing colt. The cadet gave the order with a sneer still on his face, expecting a slaughter. His B rank charged, a real fighter, armored and low and trained, the kind of beast that wins circuit ribbons and ends careers. My fusion took the hit on its plated shoulder. The impact rang across the yard. But the ridgeback armor held. Where a normal beast would have been driven back, mine turned inside the bigger beast's reach, faster than its bulk had any right to be, the pit strain drive uncoiling. It drove up under the B rank's guard where the armor was thin. Once. That was all it took. The B rank staggered. Its legs went. It went down in the dirt of the yard in front of the whole academy, and it did not get up quickly, and the cadet's face came apart. The yard was dead silent. Then somebody said it low into the quiet, the thing that would travel further than any coin ever had. That's not any beast in the registry. I didn't celebrate. I didn't say a word. I called my fusion off, put my body between it and the crowd, and moved for the loft while the shock still held them. I slipped the yard before it turned into a mob or a report. But I felt the eyes follow me out. 2 sets, specifically. Verrill was at the yard's edge with his ledger, and he wasn't watching the downed B rank. He was watching me, and his pen was moving. Another anomaly logged. A guard beast in the stables, a runner nobody's seen, and now a fused-looking thing that put a B rank in the dirt. 3 lines in his book that all pointed one direction, even if he couldn't name it yet. And Sarah stood by the gate, and she wasn't looking at the beast at all. She was looking at me the way you look at a stranger who's wearing a friend's face. The wonder was gone from her. Something colder had replaced it, not hate, calculation. The beginning of a value she was starting to put on what she'd just seen. The win that answered every defect they'd ever thrown at me was the same win that lit the fuse. I'd wanted for one breath to be seen. Now 2 people I couldn't afford were watching me too closely. The inspector who logged what he couldn't yet name, and the friend whose face had begun to change. The bounty hunter didn't want the coin on me, he wanted to see the beast. He caught me behind the grain sheds at dusk, a scarred man with a tracker lizard and too much curiosity. The runner. The thing that dropped a B rank. He circled, easy, hand loose. Word says a defect's got something nobody's seen. I collect what nobody's seen. Show me, and I'll walk. Or don't, and I'll drag you to a proctor and we'll both find out. I didn't show him Ashwing. I showed him the combat fusion from the yard, and I won ugly. His tracker lizard was fast and mean, and it opened a line across my beast's flank before we turned it. No clean single blow this time. It was teeth and dust and my own boots slipping in the mud until my fusion got its jaws set and the lizard yielded. The hunter backed off with his hands up, grinning like he'd gotten what he came for. Impossible, he said, delighted, and left. That was the problem. Every fight I won bought me a witness. The rumor wasn't a leak anymore. It was a current, and it was pulling me toward the one place a defect could grow inside the law. The licensed hunt gate was the only lawful door I had. The one beast law says 1 bond per soul. But the hunt gates are the Empire's exception. Take a sanctioned contract, clear the qualifying fight, and you may capture exactly 1 wild beast for a stated purpose. 1. Legal, stamped, witnessed. It was the only way to put a wild bloodline in my hands without a burned wrist. I needed a wild line. My strays were farm stock and alley stock. I'd fused them to their ceiling. To build anything bigger I needed blood the streets couldn't give me, so I registered for a contract and cleared the qualifier, a straightforward gate beast, downed clean by my combat fusion while the gate wardens marked my card. 1 wild capture, authorized, stamped, legal. The wardens looked at the F rank on my wrist and looked at the beast that had just dropped a qualifier without taking a scratch, and one of them frowned and said nothing and wrote it down anyway. I was getting used to that look. It was the look of a system running into a thing it had no box for, and deciding to file it under something ordinary so it could stop thinking about it. I walked through the gate into the contract grounds with Ashwing under a canvas at my back, and that was my mistake, though I didn't know it yet. I'd brought it for safety. A grown Ashwing was worth any 2 of my other beasts in a bad spot. It never occurred to me, 17 and still learning, that the safest beast to bring was the most dangerous one to be seen with. The ambush came a quarter mile in. A pack of gate ferals broke from the tree line, 6 of them, coordinated, driving hunters into a killing funnel. 2 other contract holders went down under the rush. My combat fusion took the first feral and held, but 6 against 1 was arithmetic. I was losing. I had a choice. Lose the beast, and maybe my life, or pull the canvas. I pulled the canvas. Ashwing came off my back into the open for the first time in its life, and it was not boot-sized anymore. It had grown to the size of a warhound, scales black along one flank, storm gray feathers along the other, the crest snapping bright as it unfolded. For 1 heartbeat, every hunter on that line stopped to stare at a profile that matched no page any of them had ever read. Then Ashwing struck. The charge on its crest built and broke. A storm burst wider than the plate it had thrown as a hatchling, a full sheet of blue-white light that caught the pack broadside. The air cracked. 3 ferals dropped mid-stride, legs folding, and the smell of scorched fur rolled across the clearing. The others scattered from the light on instinct, the way animals scatter from a lightning strike, and in the gap that opened my combat fusion ran down the stragglers one by one. The line that had been breaking a heartbeat before was suddenly holding, and holding because of a beast the law said couldn't exist. The other hunters lived because of a beast the law said I couldn't own. And they'd all seen it. I got the wild capture I'd come for, a lean shadow-strained gate beast, secured and stamped on my card, legal and mine. But I'd traded the one secret worth keeping to get it. Across the clearing, an A-rank hunt team had been running the same contract. They were the real thing, matched beasts, house colors, the kind of team that gets called when a break is bad. Their captain was staring at Ashwing with the particular focus of a professional seeing something that shouldn't be. He didn't shout, he didn't charge. He just looked, and memorized, and I watched him decide to find out where a stable boy got a creature with scales and feathers. I bundled Ashwing back under the canvas, its size straining the cloth now, its crest still hot against my arm. The captain hadn't moved. He was just watching, memorizing, letting me know he'd seen. That was worse than a charge. A man who charges wants your beast today. A man who watches wants to understand it, and understanding was the one thing I couldn't afford anyone to have. Move, I told my beasts. Now. We ran. They came after us. Not fast, not desperate, but certain, the way a good team runs down a lead. I put Ashwing back under canvas at the first cover and cut through the contract grounds by the routes, only a stable hand who'd hauled feed to every gate in the district would know. Through a drainage cut. Under a loading yard. Out a warden's gate meant for carts, while the A-team held the main road expecting a boy who'd take the main road. I lost them in the lower quarter as full dark came down. But I'd seen the captain's face, and I knew that kind of man doesn't drop a thread. Someone was going to report this. The only question was how many days I had before the report had my name on it. Sarah was waiting at the loft. She'd followed the rumor to the gate. She'd seen it, not the shape under canvas, the shape in the open, the storm burst, all of it. She stood in the loft doorway with her arms crossed and her honey blonde hair fussed back and her whole careful bearing gone tight. Scales and feathers, she said. I saw it, Roan, in the open. That's not a defect's egg. The leverage in the room had just moved. She knew enough now to end me with one sentence to one proctor. What are you going to do with that? I asked. Calm. Always calm. I don't know. And she didn't. That was the terrible part. I haven't told anyone. I don't even know what I saw. She stepped in, lowered her voice. What are you, Roan? I could have lied again. I was good at it now, she'd said so herself. But I was so tired of the mask, and she was the last person alive who'd known me before it, and something in me wanted, badly, stupidly, to be known by someone. I make them, I said. The words were out before I'd weighed them. Not the whole truth. A door left half open. Make them, she repeated. The beasts. I don't tame a stronger one. I take two, and I make one that never existed. I stopped there, at the edge of the cliff, and did not say fusion tamer, did not say the class, did not hand her the word that was worth a house's fortune. That's all I can tell you. That's already more than my life. She stared at me for a long moment. I watched her want to be the girl who trained beside me and watched her be, also, the daughter of a family drowning in debt, both at once, in one face. You shouldn't have told me even that, she said quietly. I know. Why did you? Because you're the only one left, I didn't say. Because I wanted one person who knew, I said instead, which was the same thing, smaller. She stood there a while longer, and I watched her turn it over. The girl who'd trained beside me since we were 9, and the daughter of a house drowning under a name it couldn't pay for. I could see both of them in her face, and I couldn't tell which one would win, and I told myself it didn't matter, because the Sarah I knew would never sell a friend. I was 17 and I wanted that to be true, so I decided it was. She left without promising anything. And I lay awake knowing I'd just done the most dangerous thing I'd done all season, and it hadn't been a fusion. It had been trusting the shape of an old friendship over the shape of the ledger she was drowning under. The break came 3 days later, and it changed the size of everything. It started at the city's edge, a minor dungeon rift, one of the small ruptures the registry usually seals in an afternoon. But the ferals that poured out of it didn't behave like the small ones. They came in a wave, and the district's registered defenders formed a line, and I watched from a rooftop as the line began to buckle. These were purebred beasts. Certified, ranked, the pride of their houses. Single-line stock bred for a century. And they were losing ground to what climbed out of the rift, giving back yard after yard while people ran behind them. The walls won't hold this, someone screamed. Nothing purebred can hold it. That was the first time I understood the thing the whole empire was pretending not to see. The breaks were getting worse, and the beasts everyone was legally allowed to own were falling behind them. I wasn't a defender. I had no standing to be there. I went anyway. I dropped off the roof into the alley behind the line, and I put Ashwing and my 2 fusions into the gap where the purebreds were bleeding through. Ashwing's stormburst caught a knot of ferals broadside and cleared a lane. My combat fusion plugged the breach. My shadow strain, half-tamed, not yet fused, but bonded and willing, harried the flanks. Where the certified line had been giving way, 3 impossible beasts held. It was ugly work. A breach line isn't a clean fight, it's a wall of pressure that wants to come through, and you hold it by refusing to move while things break against you. My combat fusion took wounds. Ashwing's crest dimmed and rebuilt and dimmed again, spending charge faster than it could make it. But every feral that got past a purebred met one of mine instead, and the line that had been folding stopped folding, and the people running behind it got the seconds they needed. We held it long enough for the registry sealing team to close the rift. Then I pulled back into the alleys before anyone could ask which house I fought for, because the answer was none, and the truth was worse than none. But I'd seen it now with my own eyes. A fused beast held where the purebreds failed, not because I was strong. Because what I made was built for a world the Empire's studbooks hadn't caught up to yet. The Empire needed new species. It just didn't know it, and it had a law that burned the wrist off anyone who made one. Verrill filed the outbreak report the next morning. I know, because a clerk I'd bought a drink for told me what was in it. The inspector had noted every beast that fought the line. And, in the margin, against the description of the beasts that had no house and no registration, and had held where the certified stock broke, he'd written a query. He'd cross-referenced it against the stable spot inspection from the start of the season, and the guard beast kill he'd logged and never quite believed, and the fused-looking thing that dropped a B rank in the yard. 3 anomalies. 1 recurring guard beast, all of them tracing back, through his own careful ledger, to one name. The inspector was connecting the dots. He was writing the name that fit. And the net around me was no longer passive. The dungeon swallowed the light 6 steps down and did not give it back. I went deep because the gates weren't enough anymore. A gate beast is wild, but it's shallow blood. The same lines the houses bred a century ago, just gone feral. To build something that could stand against what the breaks were spilling out, I needed a rarer line, and the rare lines live where nobody sane goes to get them. The deep dungeon, down where the good blood breeds in the dark. I was hunting a shadow line beast. I'd seen the sign of one on a gate contract, a predator that didn't cast a shadow because it moved through them. If it was real, it was exactly the ingredient I needed. It was real. It found me before I found it. I never saw it coming. One moment the tunnel was empty, the next a weight hit me from a wall I'd already checked, from inside my own shadow. I went down hard. The scent hound I'd brought, a lean tracker I'd tamed and kept, got its teeth into the thing and it flickered out of reach again, gone into the dark like smoke into smoke. You cannot fight what you cannot find. It bled my scent hound twice more, flickering in from angles that didn't exist, and each time it was gone before I could turn. A tamer with one beast would have died in that tunnel. So I stopped trying to fight it. I did what I do. I read it. A beast that hunts through shadow can't be cornered by light. But it has to solidify to bite. I let it come. I let my scent hound track the one thing the shadow beast couldn't hide, its smell. When it flickered in to strike, I was already there, a scrap, a still hand, the smell of a boy who wasn't afraid. The bond took. Second capture of the dive, and everyone passed the first, still a crime. Then, with the shadow beast bonded and the scent hound bonded, and both of them mine, I put a hand on each and I fused them where I knelt in the dark. The mark on my wrist seared and darkened another shade. But what rose out of the two of them was worth the burn. It was a hound in its bones. But it hunted by scent like the tracker and it moved like the shadow thing, sliding in and out of the dark, here and then not here, closing distance without crossing it. A dungeon feral came at us on the way out, and my new hound was simply behind it before it finished its lunge, having stepped through a shadow to get there. It hunted by nose and by dark at once. Two bloodlines in one animal, doing something neither parent could. No studbook in the Empire holds that line. I'd made it in an afternoon, in the dark, out of 2 strays and a scar. It won me the dive. I came up out of the dark with a bonded shadowline hound at my heel, and blood that wasn't mine drying on my sleeve, and for the first time I understood the real shape of what my class was. Not a defect. Not even just a secret. An engine. Every beast in the Empire was an ingredient to me. Every hunt gate, every dungeon, every stray in an alley was a line I could read and combine into something no studbook had ever held. Other tamers had a ceiling, one beast, one rank, fixed for life. I had a blueprint, and the blueprint had no top to it. It made me, for the first time, dangerous on purpose. I took the shadow scent hound to a hunt gate the following week, and, without meaning to make a point, made one. The same A-rank team was running the contract, the captain who'd memorized Ashwing's profile at the ambush. This time they were tracking a den of gate ferals through broken country, the kind of work their reputation was built on. Their beasts were the finest tracking stock in the district, generations bred for the nose and the chase, and they moved through the broken country with the easy confidence of professionals on their own ground. My hound found the den first. It phased past their whole line. One moment on the ridge, the next simply not there. Then somewhere ahead in a shadow it had stepped through. It sniffed out every feral in the warren and had them flushed and cornered before the 8-team certified trackers had cleared the first ridge. The captain watched a stable boy's nameless hound do in an hour what his housebred pack couldn't do in a day. He didn't thank me. His jaw set. "Where," he said, "do you keep getting them?" I didn't answer, but I saw the shape of a new enemy in his face, not a man who'd report me now, but a man who wanted, badly, to own the answer. That was the trouble with winning. Every win made the answer more valuable. And there was a house in the Empire whose entire fortune was built on owning valuable answers. Sarah's family was 3 payments from losing their name. I didn't know how close until later, but the Calder agent knew. That's what Calder agents do. They trawl the rumor of an impossible beast, and they find the person nearest to it who has a price. They found Sarah in her family's re-hemmed finery, in a townhouse the bank already half-owned, and they put a number on the table. Enough to clear the debt. Enough to restore the name. Enough to undrown a whole family, for one piece of information about one defect and one beast that had no page in any book. I know how the agent framed it, because I've had a long time to imagine it, not, betray your friend. Never that. A Calder agent is too careful for a word like betray. Confirm a rumor. Everyone else is guessing. You know, and what has he ever done for your family's ledger? That's the trick of it. They don't ask you to hate anyone. They ask you to be practical. They put your drowning family on one side of the scale and a stable boy's secret on the other. They let the weight of your whole life do the pushing. Then they call whatever you do afterward your own free choice. Sarah had spent 17 years watching her house sink under a name it couldn't afford. The agent didn't have to make her cruel. He only had to make her tired. She came to the loft that night. To decide, I think. To look at me one more time before she chose. I didn't hear her on the stairs. I was working. Ashwing on the straw, grown now to the size of a young horse, scales and feathers and a crest that lit the loft blue when it stretched. I had 2 strays in front of me, and I put my hand on each, and I fused them while she stood in the doorway and watched the whole thing happen. She saw it plainly. Not a shape under canvas. The class itself. 2 beasts becoming one, their outlines running soft and flowing together. The mark searing dark on my wrist, the new animal uncurling in the straw where 2 had lain a moment before. She saw Ashwing lift its head from the far corner and lean into my hand, the charge on its crest lighting the loft blue. She saw everything the examiner had stamped as a broken crystal. She understood in one moment that it was the opposite of broken. The boy she'd trained beside since they were 9 was the single most valuable secret in the Empire, standing in a feedloft, showing it to her because she was the only one he trusted with it. That was the cruelty of the timing, though I didn't feel it as cruelty then. I showed her the whole truth the same week a Calder agent put a price on her family's name. Now she fully knew. Not a rumor. Not a half-truth I'd handed her. All of it. "Roan," she said, and her voice was strange. "Sarah." I didn't move. I let her look. Some part of me still believed that being known was safe with her. "Now you've seen it." "Now I've seen it," she agreed. She left. She didn't promise anything. She never did. 2 days later, she sold it. She went to the Calder townhouse. Ivory and gold and cold blue-gray trim, everything her family's house had stopped being able to afford, and she told Lord House Calder exactly what I was. Not a defect, a fusion tamer. A boy who could make new species out of bonded beasts, whose first creation was a scales and feathers drake no bestiary held, and who kept it in the Grey Warden stables under a canvas. She took the money. Her family's debt cleared that same week, and her house's name, 3 payments from ruin, was suddenly safe again. 1 transaction. 1 secret for 1 restoration. On paper it was a good trade, and paper was the only place it would ever look like one. I want to be able to say she hated me. It would be simpler. But she didn't. That's the part that never stops. She weighed a bond she'd had since she was 9 against a family drowning under a name they couldn't pay for, and she chose the family, and she priced me to do it. She didn't destroy me out of malice. She sold me because the math of her whole life had come due, and I was the only asset she had. She cried doing it, I heard later. It didn't change the number on the paper. The one person who knew me before the mask handed the mask's enemies the key. Lord House Calder was, by every account, delighted in his cold and courteous way. He was a collector. Early 30s, sleek and immaculate, jet-black hair oiled back, pale ice-blue eyes, an ivory ducal coat that had never seen a stable. House Calder held the Empire's beast-breeding monopoly. Nobody bred an apex Calder didn't sell. And here was an anomaly the market had never seen, a boy making bloodlines no one else could. To Halric, that wasn't a person. It was an asset that had been sitting unowned, and Lord House Calder did not leave assets unowned. He didn't send hunters, he didn't need to. He had something better than force, he had the law. He filed a tribunal seizure warrant with the Imperial Beast Registry. In it, he named the Scales and Feathers beast in the Grey Warden stables precisely, in language Sarah's information had made possible. He did not call it a miracle, he called it unregistered livestock, an unlawful second bond held by an F rank in violation of the One Beast law, subject to seizure by the registry and forfeit to the Crown's licensed handler, which the warrant helpfully named as House Calder. It was elegant, in the cold way Halric did everything. He didn't have to prove I was dangerous. He didn't have to prove the beast was a miracle, or admit it was one. He only had to point at the plain fact of it: 1 soul, 2 bonds, and let the One Beast law do the rest. The very thing that made Ashwing extraordinary was, in the eyes of that law, simply the crime. He turned the exact law that had branded me a defect in the Awakening Hall into the tool that would take the first thing I ever made. He believed it would work perfectly. He believed a beast was a thing you could own by holding the paper on it. He didn't know the one rule that would rot his whole plan from the inside. Because Sarah hadn't known it to sell, because I never told a soul, because it hadn't come up yet in a way anyone could see. He didn't know what a fused beast does when it's taken from its maker. The house that owns bloodlines had its target. A seizure warrant was signed and sealed. Ashwing was named unregistered livestock on paper, in a registry office, in ink. And the friend who'd trained beside me since we were 9 was the one who'd handed them the key. The law was a weapon now, and I didn't know it was already drawn, already moving, already coming up the stable road with my name on it. The registry came up the stable road at midday, and Verrill was at the front of them. He had the warrant in his hand and no pleasure in his face. He'd known for weeks, in his careful way, that something in the Grey Warden stables didn't add up. Now the paper made it official, and the thorough man had to be the one to execute what his own ledger had led to. That's the cruelty of a man like Verrill, not malice. Duty, aimed correctly at last. "Roan," he said, and read it out. By order of the Imperial Beast Registry, on complaint of House Calder, the beast held in this stable is named unregistered livestock in violation of the One Beast law. It is to be seized. Surrender it. I took the warrant from his hand and read it myself. And that was how I learned who had done this. It was too precise. It named the beast's exact profile: scales along one flank, feathers along the other, the charge on the crest. It named the canvas I kept it under. It named the loft. It described a fusion process no witness at a hunt gate could have seen, that only one person alive had watched from a doorway. Sarah. I didn't say her name. I stood in the straw with the paper in my hand and felt the bottom go out of something I'd thought would hold. She'd sold me. The last one from before. I filed it where I file everything, cold and deep, and I moved. You'll have to catch it first, I told Viral, and I ran. I got Ashwing out the back of the stables ahead of them. Grown to horse scale now, it ran with me down the drainage cut and into the lower quarter, and for a moment I thought Stable Boy's roots would save us the way they had before. Then the hunt team hit us from the front. Calder hadn't trusted the registry to run me down. He'd hired his own, a full contract team, matched beasts, cutting off the lower quarter at every mouth. They didn't want to kill me, they wanted the beast whole, and they herded us the way you herd stock, closing lanes, folding us in, driving us where they wanted us to go. I knew what they were doing before I was halfway down the 3rd Street. I'd hauled feed through this quarter 100 times, I knew every mouth and cut in it. And every time I broke for one, a Calder beast was already standing in it, patient, not even winded. They weren't chasing me. They were fencing me. A house that owns everything can afford to put a man in every doorway and simply wait for the stock to tire. Ashwing wanted to turn and fight. I could feel it in the pull of the bond, the charge building on its crest, the way it kept trying to plant its feet. I kept it running. Turn here and I'd be fighting a full sanctioned team in the open with an illegal beast, and every second of that fight was another witness, another charge, another warrant. They drove us into the warehouse district and boxed us in a loading yard with one gate. I could have fought. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I had Ashwing, and my combat fusion, and the Shadow Scent Hound that could have phased half that team into confusion. I might even have won. But every beast I threw at them was another impossible profile in front of a dozen witnesses. Every fusion I used to save Ashwing would be a new crime, a new warrant, a new unregistered livestock. And worse, if I maimed a registry-sanctioned enforcer, I stopped being a defect with a secret and became a criminal the law could justly destroy. Fight the whole team, and I might keep Ashwing for a night and lose everything, forever, with the law finally, cleanly on their side. The captain of the team knew it too. He kept his distance and let the arithmetic do his work. Hand it over, defect, he called. Or resist a lawful warrant and hang for it, your choice. It wasn't a choice, it was the same trap the examiner had built, closing one more notch. Ashwing pressed against my side, crest low, a growl building in its chest. It would have fought the whole team for me. I could feel it straining against the bond, ready to spend itself on any command I gave. That was the terrible part. It trusted me to point it, and the right thing to do with that trust was to give it up. It didn't understand paper. It only understood that these were not my hands, and that mine had gone still, and that stillness for me had always meant safety before. I put my hand on its neck. The charge on its crest ran up under my palm, warm and furious. Not like this, I said, quiet, just for it. I'm not going to make you the thing they say you are. I let them take it. I stood in that loading yard and I surrendered the first thing I ever made to a lawful warrant, because becoming a true criminal was the one move that would let them win completely. It was the hardest still I have ever held. Ashwing screamed when the handlers got the harness on it, a sound I still hear. It fought them the whole way onto the wagon and looked back at me the entire distance down the road. I did nothing, because doing something was the trap. That is what restraint costs. Everyone tells you it's strength. No one tells you it feels exactly like cowardice from the inside. The captain of the team didn't crow about it. He signaled his people, loaded the wagon, and left me standing in an empty loading yard with the gate open behind me. That was the worst part. They didn't even need to guard me after. Where would I go? I had nothing left to run with. They'd taken the one thing running was for. I walked back to the loft that night through streets that already knew. Word travels in the lower quarter faster than any courier. By the time I reached the stables, the whole academy had heard that the registry had seized the defect's beast, and the ones who'd laughed at my awakening had a fresh thing to laugh at. I didn't hear most of it. I heard one clearly, from a window as I passed. Save your coin, I said his beast would be culled by inspection. They'd been wrong about the timing and right about the ending, and that was somehow the cruelest version. Sarah was on the tribunal steps when they led me in. She hadn't meant to be, I think. She'd come to see what she'd sold, the way you touch a bruise. She saw me walk in behind the seized beast, empty-handed, branded, and something crossed her face that hadn't been there when she took the money. The first flicker of it. Not enough. Just the beginning of understanding that a number on a paper and a boy led into a courtroom were the same transaction, seen from two ends. She didn't speak. Neither did I. There was nothing to say that the warrant hadn't already said for both of us. The tribunal was cold marble and a raised bench and a caged holding pen along one wall. Lord House Calder stood for the complaint, serene in his ivory coat, and made his case like a man reading a receipt. An F-rank defect, he said, in unlawful possession of a second bond. The beast is unregistered. Its very existence violates the one beast law. House Calder, as the Crown's licensed handler of forfeit livestock, requests seizure and transfer. He inclined his head, courteous, certain. The law is not complicated, honored bench. One soul, one beast. This one has two. The remedy writes itself. He never once looked at me like an opponent. He looked at me like an inventory error he was correcting. That was almost worse than hate. Hate would have meant I was a person to him. The gallery was full. Word had gone out that the defect who put a B rank in the dirt was up before the tribunal, and people had come to watch the rest of the fall. I saw faces from the academy in the seats. I saw the noble cadet whose beast I'd downed. I kept my eyes forward and my hands still and gave them nothing to feed on, which is the only dignity a defect is ever allowed in a room like that. The bench asked me if I disputed the count. I could have argued the beast was a miracle, that the Empire needed exactly what I made, that the breaks were getting worse and single-line stock was falling behind them. I could have told them a defect had held a breach line where their certified purebreds broke. I could have said all of it. None of it was a legal defense. The law didn't care what Ashwing could do. It cared that it was a second bond, and it was. No, I said. I don't dispute the count. Because I didn't. The count was true. The law was the crime, not me. But the tribunal wasn't there to judge the law. They seized Ashwing legally, on paper, on screen, in front of the whole gallery. The stamp came down. The beast in the pen was recorded as forfeit livestock, transferred to House Calder. My registration was struck. My name went into the ledger under a heavier word than defect. Halric received the paper with a small, cold bow, and won the round completely, and I walked out of that tribunal with nothing. No beast, no cover, no secret left to keep. The defect, beaten in public under the exact law from the day of my awakening. That was the bottom. Standing on those steps, empty-handed, I understood there was no lower place they could put me. I was wrong about one thing, though. So was Halric. So was everyone in that courtroom. None of them had ever asked what a fused beast does when you take it from the one who made it. They found out in the Calder pens that same night, and no one but the audience of my own future understood what it meant. They put Ashwing in a stall built for an apex mount, and they sent in handlers to break it to the harness. Calder's best, men who'd gentled 100 prize beasts. Ashwing wouldn't take a hand. Not one. It savaged the harness to strips. It threw itself at the bars when they came near and went dead still and refused when they backed off. The charge on its crest never once flared for them. It saved that for no one in that place. They brought it food. It didn't eat, not the first day when they thought it was shock. Not the third, when they thought it was stubbornness. Not the sixth, when the first worry crept into the handlers' voices and they started leaving the stall door open a crack, testing, as if it might bolt for freedom. It didn't bolt. It lay against the wall it had chosen and watched the door and waited for a hand that wasn't going to come, and refused to be gentled toward any that did. They brought it a Calder beastmaster, the finest the house owned. He did every gentle and cruel thing his craft knew. Ashwing lay against the far wall with its scales dull and its feathers going ragged and refused him with its whole body. Not tame. Not obedient. Not theirs. A fused beast imprints on the one who made it. It obeys that one and no other. It will starve against a wall rather than serve a hand it didn't choose. No one in the Calder pens knew that rule yet. They thought it was a wild temper that would break with hunger. They didn't understand they'd bought a creature that would waste away to nothing before it took a single order from them. That every day it refused was a day their fortune sat inert in a stall. That the value they paid Sarah for had never been the beast at all. It had been a boy they'd just thrown away, whose hands were the only hands it would ever answer to. Halric had won the round. He held the seized beast, the leaked notes, the legal victory, the whole apparatus of the Empire's most powerful house lined up behind a stamp. And in a dark stall across the capital, starving and defiant and refusing every handler alive, Ashwing was already proving the whole prize worthless. The court didn't know it. Calder didn't know it. Sarah didn't know it. The win was already rotting, and only I, and you, could see it. I didn't sleep the night they took Ashwing. I sat in the empty loft where its warmth should have been, and I did the coldest arithmetic of my life. Pell found me there at dawn. He didn't say anything stupid, for once. He just sat down beside me in the straw and waited. Hiding didn't work, I said finally. My voice came out flat. I hid for a season. I registered a miracle as a defect egg. I kept my head down and took up no space and stayed invisible, and they took it anyway. Being unseen didn't save Ashwing. It's what let them take it quietly, with no one watching but a court that already agreed. So what do you do? Pell said. I looked at my wrist, at the Tamer mark scarred dark from every fusion, the thing the examiner had branded worthless. The opposite, I said. I stop hiding. I build in the open. I make beasts nobody can look away from, in front of the whole capital. And I dare the registry to burn the mark off the only Tamer whose beasts can hold a break. I felt the strategy turn over inside me like a key. They win when I'm invisible, so I'm going to be impossible to ignore. Pell had been telling me to do exactly this for a season. He'd been right about the destination the whole time. He'd just been wrong about the cost of arriving before I was ready. And now the cost was paid, Ashwing was gone, and there was nothing left to protect by hiding. The mask came off. Not because it was safe, because it was useless. There's a strange freedom in losing the thing you were protecting. All season I'd calculated every move against a single question. Would this expose me? Now the answer didn't matter. They'd already exposed me, seized me, beaten me in public under the law. The worst thing hiding was meant to prevent had happened while I hid. So the calculation that had ruled my whole life since the Awakening Hall simply switched off, and what was left underneath it was cold and clear and finally free to move. Finally, Pell breathed. Then, quieter, you know they'll come at you with everything. I'm counting on it. The next hunt gate, I registered under my own name. Roan, F rank. Defect. No canvas. I walked a new fusion through the gate in full view, a thing I'd built in 3 days from a ridge strain and a dune lizard, low and armored and quick across broken ground. The gate warden stared. The crowd that always gathers at a licensed gate went quiet, then loud, because everyone in the district knew the name now. The defect who lost his beast to the Duke. Come to fight in the open. The contract was a bad one on purpose, a den of gate ferals that had killed 2 teams that month. The kind of fight a defect had no business taking. The gate wardens tried to talk me out of registering for it. I signed the card anyway, and I made sure the crowd saw me sign it, because the whole point was to be watched doing the thing I wasn't supposed to survive. The ferals came out of the den fast and mean, in a wedge, the same wedge that had broken 2 teams. My fusion met them low. It took the first one on its armored shoulder, rolled under the second, and came up inside the wedge where a bigger beast couldn't turn. I built it in 3 days for exactly this. Broken ground, close work, an enemy that fought in a pack and expected room. I'd read the ferals from the 2 dead teams' accounts and matched the beast to the fight before I ever fused it. It shouldn't have won, it was outnumbered and outmassed, but it fought like something built for exactly that ground, because it was. It came out bloodied and standing while the ferals didn't, and the crowd that had come to watch a broken F-rank die, watched a new species do what their certified stock couldn't. New species number 5, fought and won in front of 100 witnesses I'd spent a whole season avoiding. Whatever that is, someone said loud, it's not on any page I've read. Good, I thought. Read the next one. Across the Capitol, Halric was reading pages of his own, my pages. He had the seized beast and he had my notes, the ones Sarah's Sale had led his people to pull from the loft. And he did exactly what a man who believes worth equals property does. He launched a breeding program. If a defect could make new species, then House Calder, with 100 years of studbooks, the finest beastmasters, and my own method in hand, would make them better and own the whole market before I could grow another. He announced it like a triumph. The Forced Fusion Program. Calder-bred anomalies made to order, sold under license. The Empire's next generation of apex beasts and House Calder holding everyone. It was doomed from the first egg, and only I knew why. He had the method. He had the notes. He had the seized beast to study. What he did not have, what he could never buy from Sarah or steal from my loft, was the one rule I'd never written down, because I'd never told anyone. A fused beast imprints on its maker. It obeys the hands that made it, and no others. His copies weren't mine. They'd have no maker whose hands they knew. The first ones hatched 3 weeks in. I heard it from a Calder groom who drank in the lower quarter and didn't know who I was, and who talked because the thing had scared him badly enough that he needed to. They came out wrong. Not weak, wrong. Fusions with no one to imprint on, no bond to steady them, all instinct and no anchor. A fused beast is supposed to wake looking for the hands that made it. These woke looking for nothing, and a thing that answers to nothing is not a beast, it's a weapon with no one holding it. They hatched feral. They obeyed no handler, savaged their pens, turned on their own keepers. One tore loose in the breeding grounds the first week and had to be put down by a full team before it reached the road. The groom said 2 men were hurt doing it. The Duke's people wrote it up as a training accident and forced the next batch anyway. Calder called it a compatibility failure and told his beastmasters to refine the lines. He thought it was a flaw in the method. It wasn't. It was the method working exactly as it must, in the hands of a man it would never answer to. Every copy he forced was a time bomb with a lit fuse, and he was building a whole barn of them and calling it a monopoly. I kept building in the open. And I built something bigger. Pell helped me this time. Loud, delighted, hauling ingredients and running interference and telling anyone who'd listen that they were about to see something. His noise, which had been a danger when I was hiding, was an asset now that I wanted a crowd. I brought 3 lines together. Not 2, 3, a chimera. It's harder by an order. 2 bloodlines want to argue, 3 want to tear apart. I'd never dared it while I was hiding, because a failed 3-line fusion goes feral or dies, and either one exposes you. But I wasn't hiding anymore, and I'd spent a season learning to read which lines would hold. Armor from one. Reach from another. A current strain in the third that answered to the same stormblood that ran in Ashwing. The mark seared so dark when it fused that Pell caught me before I went down. But what rose off the circuit sand was worth it. A 3-line chimera, plated and long and crackling, a beast the sparring circuit had no rank for. New species number 6. Debuted in front of a growing crowd that no longer came to laugh. Halric couldn't let that stand. Losing the street's attention was worse to him than losing money, so he did the thing his kind always does. He tried to take the narrative back by force, on his own ground, with his own beast. He sponsored a ranked duel, framed it as a mercy the registry, generously, would let the defect prove his livestock, against a proper Calder mount in the ranked arena, before the whole capital. He expected a public humiliation. His house had bred apex mounts for a century. What was a stable boy's cobbled-together animal against that? He wasn't there himself, of course. He never rode into anything. He sent a proxy and a groomed apex mount and a full gallery he'd papered with his own people to jeer. The apex mount was magnificent, a century of pedigree in every line of it, a groomed, flawless thing, the kind of beast a house builds its whole reputation on. My chimera was 3 strays and a scar, cobbled together on a sparring circuit by a boy who mucked stalls. On paper, it wasn't a contest. That was exactly why Halric wanted it public. Pell was in my corner, of course, loud as ever, telling the paid gallery to enjoy the show while they could. I told him to be quiet and he ignored me. And for once, his noise was the right noise, because a crowd that's told to expect something starts watching for it. They set them loose and the gallery jeered the defect, and my chimera took the apex mount apart. Not quickly. The Calder beast was strong and trained and proud. But it fought like one thing, and my chimera fought like 3, and every time the apex committed to one line of attack, my beast answered with a bloodline the pedigree had never met. It went under the mount's guard with the pit drive, took the counter on its plate, and put the apex down on the arena sand in front of a gallery Calder had paid to laugh. The gallery didn't laugh. The jeers curdled and turned, and by the end the paid crowd was on its feet with everyone else, and the phrase went through the arena and out into the streets, and I couldn't have stopped it if I'd wanted to. The defect outbreeds the Duke. Calder was losing the public. For a man who believed the world could be owned, watching the street reread me in real time, from broken F-rank to the Tamer who put a Duke's apex in the dirt, was the first thing his money couldn't fix. I should have felt triumphant. For an hour I did. I should have felt it longer. I'd spent a season being laughed at, and here was the whole current running the other way. The defect out breeds the Duke, in the streets, out of my control, exactly the reputation I'd have killed for at the start. Nobles who'd set their beasts on me now looked away when I passed. The A-team captain who'd wanted to own my answer now watched me from a distance and said nothing. I had crowds. I had a name. I had, for the first time, the thing the examiner had stamped out of me in the awakening hall. Then Pell came to find me after, and his face was wrong, and he told me the thing the Calder groom had let slip in the lower quarter. Ashwing was dying in the pens, not being trained. Not being broken. Refusing. It wouldn't eat for any handler. It threw itself at the bars and then went still and wasted, day after day, scales dull, feathers ragged, the charge on its crest gone dark. It was starving itself against a wall rather than take one order from a hand that wasn't mine. The Calder beastmasters couldn't understand it. I understood it perfectly, and it was worse to understand. I'd flipped a whole city's read of me in a season of open defiance. I had crowds now, a reputation, a name that meant something other than defect. I'd outbred the Duke in front of the capital. And none of it reached the one stall where the first thing I ever made was starving itself faithful to me. I stood in the arena shadow with the crowd still roaring my name somewhere behind me, and understood that winning in the open was not the same as winning. I could beat Calder in front of 100 people and still leave Ashwing in the dark. I couldn't leave it in there. Whatever it cost, whatever it exposed, I could not leave it in there. Pell wanted me to burn it all down that night. I understood the urge. I didn't take it. You have proof, he said, pacing the loft. The beast won't obey them. The copies are hatching feral. Half the lower quarters heard a Calder groom talk. Take it to the registry now. Expose the whole rotten program and get Ashwing out. And Calder settles it in a week, I said. He stopped. A groom's gossip and a stable boy's word against a ducal house? I shook my head. He buys the groom's silence. He calls the feral copies a training accident. He puts Ashwing down quietly as unmanageable livestock before I can prove a thing, and the whole program disappears into a paper drawer. If I move now, I move too small, and he buries it. I made myself say the hard part. Ashwing stays in that stall longer if I'm patient, I know that. I'm choosing it anyway. It was the hardest kind of restraint, not the kind that saves you a fight, the kind that leaves someone you love in the dark because rushing loses the war. I had the standing to swing now. I put the swing away and waited for a target Calder couldn't paper over. That was the plan. It lasted 2 days because Ashwing had a plan of its own. They never truly held it. That was the thing Calder never understood. You cannot cage a beast that answers to no hand in the building. You can only hold the walls around it, and walls have a bad night eventually. Ashwing had a bad night, and then Calder did. It had been starving itself for weeks, but starving hadn't made it weak the way they'd bet. It had made it patient, the way it had learned patience from me. When a handler's harness slipped one evening, the beast that had refused every order in that place put a full season of stored fury into one motion. The charge came back to its dark crest all at once. The stormburst blew the stall bars apart. It went through the Calder pens like weather, and no handler alive could call it back, because it had never once belonged to them. It came across the capital in the dark, unerring, the way a thing comes home. No handler followed it far. What could they do? Chase a storm through the lower quarter and explain to the Duke that the seized asset had blown its own stall apart? They'd bet everything on holding walls around a beast that had never once been theirs, and the walls had finally had their bad night. It found me in the public square where the market had gathered the next morning. A crowd, wardens, 100 witnesses, the worst possible place to be doing anything illegal, and the best possible place for what happened next. There was a cry, and people scattered, and out of the crowd came a scales and feathers shape half again the size the city remembered, ragged and gaunt from the pens and moving like a storm anyway. Wardens reached for their beasts. Someone screamed that a Calder anomaly had gotten loose. Ashwing crossed the whole square, ignored every hand and every beast and every warden, and landed at my side. It folded down against me and put its head against my chest the way it had as a hatchling in the straw. The charge on its crest flared blue-white and bright for the first time in weeks. For me, for no one else, in front of everyone. The square went silent. Then the silence broke into something I'd never heard aimed at me before. Not laughter, not jeering, but a low, wondering murmur that ran through the whole market at once. They had all watched the tribunal seize it. Many of them had been in the gallery or heard it read out in the streets. The defect's beast named forfeit livestock, transferred to House Calder, legally and completely owned. The law had settled the matter. The paper was clear. And here it was, in front of all of them. It had torn out of a ducal house's pens and crossed a city in the dark, refusing every hand in the empire, to come back to a defect stable boy and put its head against his chest in a public square. The vindication I'd felt alone in the dark, the night they caged it, the whole capital felt it now, at once, watching a seized beast choose its maker over its owner in the open. No court had explained the imprint law. Nobody needed it explained, they'd just seen it. A fused beast belongs to the one who made it, and paper cannot change that. And everyone in that square understood it in their bones before a single official said the word. He didn't tame it, someone said close to me, wondering. He made it. It came back to him. Ashwing was home, and Calder had just lost the one asset his whole program was built to study. Halric took the escape, the way a proud man takes a public humiliation, badly and fast and stupid. He couldn't admit the beast had chosen a defect over him in front of the capital. So he doubled down on the one story that let him save face, that his program worked, that Calder could make apex beasts to order, that he didn't need the escaped anomaly because he'd breed better ones. He ordered his beastmasters to accelerate apex copies, fast, to deploy publicly and prove the monopoly still owned the future. Faster meant less stable. He was forcing 3-line and 4-line fusions his people had no instinct to match, with no maker for any of them to imprint on, at a pace that guaranteed failure. Every copy came out more feral than the last. And now he was making them bigger. They started getting out. The first countryside outbreak was small, a single Calder copy that broke its pen and reached a village on the trade road before anyone knew it was loose. But it wasn't a wild feral. It was a fusion, a made thing, an animal that recombined lines no wild beast carried, obeying nothing. Fear moved up the trade road faster than the beast did. Calder's monsters were escaping into the empire. Ashwing and I put that one down together. I got there ahead of the registry. I'd started watching the trade roads the moment the first pen brand rumor reached me, because I knew Calder's acceleration would leak, and I wanted to be standing over the proof when it did. The copy had a family cornered against a barn when we came over the rise. It was a 4-line thing, huge and wrong. A fusion forced past what any bond could hold, and it turned on us with the mindless fury of a beast that answered to nothing in the world. It was the first time we'd fought side by side since the pens, and Ashwing fought like it had something to prove. We ran the copy to ground at the village edge. My chimera pinning its bulk, the shadow-sent hound flickering in and out to keep it turning. Ashwing stormburst breaking it when it finally overcommitted. The three of them moved around me like they'd never been apart, like the season in the pens had never happened. The village lived. And when it was done, I did the thing Pell had been wrong about and I'd been right to wait for. I gathered the evidence. The copy's bill told the whole story to anyone who could read a beast. Recombined lines. A forced fusion, done without a maker's bond. The stolen method in every wrong seam of it. I had the carcass documented, the village witnesses, the pen brand still on its hide. Calder's own mark, on a monster made from my stolen notes. This wasn't a groom's gossip anymore. This was proof, on Calder's brand, in a body the whole village had seen. Verrill came to the field post the next day, and I let him find me there. We stood over the documented carcass, the thorough inspector and the defect he'd tracked all season, and for the first time we were reading the same page. This is a fusion, he said slowly. A made beast, and it obeys no one. He looked at me, and there was something new and uneasy in his weathered face. Like the one in the square. Like the one I seized from your stable and signed over to House Calder. Calder's making them, I said. From a method they stole and can't control. And they can't control them because… I stopped. It wasn't time to say the whole rule. Not yet, not to an official, not until it could land where it couldn't be buried. Because they're not the ones who made them. That's all I'll say. Verrill was quiet a long moment. He'd spent a career enforcing a law, thorough and sure, and he was a man who'd started to count something that didn't balance. I certified the purebred lines that are failing on the brakes, he said, almost to himself. And I signed the seizure that put a beast that could hold them into the hands of the men breeding these. He closed his ledger. I'm not turning yet, but I'm counting. Counting what? I asked. The bodies, he said. Against the ledger. I've enforced the one beast law my whole life because a clean count keeps people safe. That was the whole of it. Order keeps people alive. He looked at the branded carcass between us. I'm starting to wonder if the count I've been keeping is the one that's getting them killed. It wasn't advocacy. It was doubt. From a man like Verrill, thorough, certain, a customs officer of souls who never once doubted the manifest, doubt was an earthquake. I didn't push him. You don't push a man who's begun to move on his own weight. I just let him stand over the proof and count. I felt the shape of what was coming before I had a name for it. The copies were getting bigger and looser. The breaks were getting worse. Somewhere ahead, those two curves were going to meet over the capital, and single-line stock and feral copies both were going to fail, and there would be one thing standing between the city and the thing that climbed out. I needed to build for it before it arrived. So I went back down into the deep dungeon, further than I'd ever gone, for an apex line. The dive nearly killed me. Apex blood doesn't breed in the shallow dark, it lives at the bottom, where the rifts run deepest and the things that guard the good lines are half-break themselves. I lost track of days. Ashwing couldn't follow all the way down, the passages were too tight, so for the worst of it I had only my chimera and the shadow-scent hound and a body running on nothing. I found the apex line beast in a flooded gallery at the very bottom, and I did not tame it so much as survive it long enough to be chosen. It was vast and old and unimpressed, a thing that had lived at the bottom of the dark long enough that the rift's pressure had become just weather to it. It didn't hunt me the way the shadow beast had. It simply refused to acknowledge that a boy who'd come this far was worth killing, and it let me stay in its water while it decided. I didn't try to overpower it. You don't overpower an apex, you offer it something it hasn't got. I sat in the flooded gallery for what might have been a day, still and patient, the way I'd learned to be still in a courtroom and a stable yard, and every place that wanted to break me. Eventually, the old thing looked at the boy who wouldn't leave and wouldn't attack and wouldn't fear it, and it made its choice. The bond took like a mountain settling. One apex line ingredient. Bonded. Barely. I came up out of the dark half dead, with the rarest blood in the empire behind my breastbone and a certainty I couldn't shake. One ingredient. One shot. I had the beast I'd need to fuse into something that could hold what was coming, and I knew, the way I'd known since the first scar, that a fusion this size would cost me the beasts I'd raised to make it. Something huge was coming for the capital. And I was the only one in the empire building for it. I had the apex line beast bonded and the fusion clear in my head, and I stood in the loft for a whole day unable to make my hand move. Because I knew what it would cost. An apex fusion isn't 2 strays and a scar. To build something that could hold a city-scale break, I'd have to pour in everything. The apex line, yes, but also my chimera and my shadow-scent hound. The beasts I'd raised from strays in the dark, the ones that had funded me and fought for me and won me back my name. Fusion consumes both parents. It always had. This time it would consume a family. Ashwing pressed its head against my arm. It couldn't go into the fusion, I wouldn't spend it, not after everything, and it was Stormblood, the apex line wouldn't take anyway. But it watched me hesitate over the others, with something that looked like understanding. They'll be gone, I told it, quiet. I raised them, and I'm going to unmake them, and whatever comes out won't be them. My throat was tight. That's the price. It was always the price. I just never had to pay this much of it at once. I put my hand on the chimera's plated shoulder. I'd built it from 3 strays and nearly lost my legs to the mark doing it, and it had put a duke's apex in the arena sand. I put my other hand on the shadow-scent hound, the one that had won me a dungeon dive and embarrassed an A-rank team, the one that still slept curled against my back some nights like it remembered being 2 smaller things that were cold. They were not tools. That was the whole trap of my class. Every other tamer bonds one beast and keeps it for life. I make new ones out of the ones I love, and the making is a kind of grief every single time. Pell watched me from the loft ladder and didn't push, which told me how bad my face must have looked. He'd spent a year telling me to fight harder, be bolder, stop hiding. He had nothing to say about this. There's no bold version of unmaking your own family. I didn't fuse that day. I couldn't. Dread and love held my hand still. Then the sky over the capital cracked, and the choice made itself. The break formed above the city the way the small ones formed at the edge, except this one didn't stop growing. A rift opened over the north wall, wide as a district, and the pressure of it pressed on everyone's ears like a held breath. The registry sounded every bell it had. Every house mobilized its beasts. The certified defenders, the ranked mounts, a century of the finest single-line stock the Empire could breed, formed up along the wall. And Calder deployed his solution. He'd promised the registry apex defenders, and this was his moment to make the monopoly's case in front of the terrified city. He marched his forced fusion apex copies up onto the wall. Huge, wrong-seamed things, made for my stolen method at a pace that guaranteed they'd never been stable. His last, most public bet that Calder could own the future. They lasted until the break ruptured. Then they turned on the men beside them. With no maker to imprint on, no bond to anchor them, the copies came apart under the pressure of the break exactly as the small ones had. They went feral on the wall. Calder's solution started killing the defenders it was sent to save, in front of the whole city, while the rift screamed open above them. The break ruptured fully, and the wall became the end of the world. Feral beasts poured out of the rift. A flood of them, wrong-shaped things, half-formed by the rift's pressure, more than anyone had ever seen come out of a single break. Calder's feral copies rampaged among them. And the certified defenders, the pride of every great house, began to die and give ground in the same breath. A ranked mount that had won ribbons for a decade went down under 3 ferals at once. The house team beside it broke and ran, single-line stock against the city-scale break. It was the outbreak at the city's edge again, multiplied 100-fold, and this time there was no alley to pull back into. Behind the wall was the whole capital, every street I'd hauled feed down, every market, every person who'd ever laughed at a defect, or bought his courier's run or watched a tribunal take his beast. The line buckled the way I'd watched it buckle at the city's edge, only there was no seal coming this time, no team small enough to plug a hole this size. The defenders knew it. You could see it in how they fought, not to win now but to buy the streets behind them a few more minutes. The wall won't hold, went up the cry, everywhere. Nothing purebred can hold it, the Empire's out of answers. They were right, the Empire was out of answers. It had bred exactly 1 law's worth of them, and the law was failing on the wall in real time. I had the only other answer, and it was still 2 beasts I hadn't been able to bring myself to spend. I climbed to the wall staging with Ashwing at my side, the apex line beast bonded, my chimera and my hound beside me. I looked at the break. I looked at my raised beasts. And there was no more day to lose to grief. I'm sorry, I told them. I put 1 hand on the chimera, 1 on the hound, and reached for the apex line with the mark, all 3 bonds at once, more than I'd ever held. I fused them. It was more than I had ever held at once. 3 bonds and an apex line, all of it pulled through the mark at the same instant. For a moment I felt each of them clearly, the chimera's 3-fold strength and the hound's cold cleverness, and the old apex's vast patience. All of them turned toward me trusting, the way they always had, right up until the moment I spent them. The mark on my wrist didn't scar this time. It seared, burned darker than it ever had, a black brand climbing past my elbow, the price of an apex written into my own skin where the whole world could read it. The pain whited out my vision and buckled my knees. Pell caught me before I fell off the staging, holding me up by the collar while I couldn't hold myself. And on the stone in front of me, the beasts I'd raised flowed together with the apex line into one shape, and were gone, and became something the world had no word for. It rose 7 times the size of the chimera, plated in overlapping armor from the ridgelines, long and low and terrible, a current running under its hide from the stormblood, an apex frame under all of it. New species number 7, made from a family I would never see again, hatched full-grown into the worst hour the capital had ever had. It restarted at stage 1, like every fusion. But an apex line at stage 1 is still an apex, and it woke up furious, and it knew my hands. I pointed it at the wall, and it went. The apex fusion hit the breach where the defenders were breaking and simply held. Ferals broke against it like water on a breakwater. Calder's copies threw themselves at it and came apart. It planted itself in the gap the certified stock had abandoned and refused to give a single yard, and behind it the retreat stopped because there was suddenly a reason to. Then Ashwing dropped out of the sky beside it. It came in over the wall with its crest blazing full blue-white, a storm on wings, and hit the ferals massing on the apex's flank before they could turn the position. The 2 of them fell into rhythm without a signal, the apex holding low and immovable, Ashwing working the air above, storm bursts clearing the ferals off the parapet in sheets of light. Maker's beasts, both of them, fighting side by side above the city, moving in a coordination no drilled house team could match, because they weren't obeying orders, they were answering the same hand. I stood on the staging and read the whole battle the way I read a fusion, where the pressure was, where a line would hold, which bloodline to throw at which threat. I called the apex left to seal a gap where a house team had broken. I called Ashwing up to break a second wave off the towers. They answered me instantly, before the words were even out, because they didn't need the words. The gap in the wall that a century of pedigree had abandoned became, in the space of minutes, the strongest point on it. The whole city saw the contrast, because I made sure they couldn't miss it. On one stretch of wall, Calder's forced copies rampaged uncontrolled, feral, killing defenders, obeying no one, the Duke's stolen method eating the men it was sent to protect. On the next stretch, my imprinted pack held in perfect concert, an apex and a stormdrake and their maker, sealing the breach the Empire's law couldn't. Two answers to the same break, side by side, for the entire capital to judge. They judged. You could feel it move through the crowd on the walls and in the streets below, 100,000 people watching two things at once and understanding, finally, which was which. The house that owned every bloodline had built the monsters. The defect they'd stamped and laughed at was holding the wall. I heard the fear in the voices near me change into something else. Calder bred those things, a defender said, staring down the wall at the copies tearing into his own. And ours? Can't stop them. Then, moments later, watching my apex plant itself in the breach, one boy is holding the brake. 1. The words moved down the line like a current, past the men who'd been ready to die a minute before and now had a reason not to. The story the whole city had told about me for a year was coming apart in real time, and there was nothing House Calder could buy that would put it back together. We sealed it at dusk. The apex fusion and Ashwing drove the last of the break's spillover back to the rift's mouth, and the registry's sealing team, working behind a line that finally held, closed the rift over the north wall. The scream of it cut off. The pressure lifted from everyone's ears at once, and in the sudden silence, the capital looked up at the wall and saw who was standing on it. Not a house, not a duke. Not a certified apex mount. A stable boy with a black brand seared up his arm, an impossible drake, and an apex made from the beasts he'd sacrificed to make it, holding the breach the whole Empire's law had failed. I didn't feel triumphant, I want to be honest about that. I stood on the wall in the quiet and I felt the hole where my chimera and my hound had been, the specific grief of beasts I'd raised and spent, the mark on my arm throbbing with a cost that would ache for months. The apex fusion turned and looked at me, a thing that had been alive for minutes and yet already knew my hands, an apex frame with 3 of my raised beasts folded somewhere inside it, none of them themselves anymore. It leaned its enormous head down toward me the way the chimera used to, and the gesture was so familiar and so wrong at once that it took the breath out of me. They were in there. And they weren't. That's what a fusion is. That's what it always was, from 2 eggs in the straw to this. I'd saved the capital and it had taken a piece of me to do it, the same way it always took a piece, only larger, because the thing I'd saved was larger. That's what the class costs. Nobody in that cheering city could see it. Only Ashwing, pressing its head to my seared arm, and Pell holding me up, and me. But the city was cheering. The city that had stamped me F rank and laughed in the awakening hall. The city that had watched a tribunal name my first beast livestock and hand it to a duke. That city watched me hold the wall, the duke's beasts couldn't, while the duke's beasts killed the men beside them. The defect held the wall. The public verdict was in, and it was total, and it was public, and it could not be papered over in any drawer in the Empire. The only question left was what the law was going to do about it now. In the quiet after the seal, the whole capital looked at me and didn't know what to say. I stood on the wall with the black brand aching up my arm, the apex fusion settling behind me, Ashwing's head against my ribs. The people on the wall, and the people in the streets below, had run out of the words they'd always used for me. Defect didn't fit anymore. It had died somewhere in the last hour, on the stretch of wall where the Duke's beasts came apart and mine held. They stared. It wasn't a cheer, not yet. It was the stunned quiet of 100,000 people rereading a boy they'd already decided about, and finding they'd been wrong the whole time. I didn't say anything. I've never been good at saying anything. I let them look, and I held Ashwing, and I let the verdict settle on its own. The evidence came out all at once, the way held water comes out when the dam finally goes. There was no burying it now. The Calder copies had failed on the wall in front of the entire city, feral, uncontrolled, killing the men they were sent to defend, branded with the Duke's own mark. I brought the field post carcass, the pen brands, the village witnesses. Verrill brought his ledger, the one he'd been quietly balancing all season. And together, in front of an emergency registry session, the whole thing was laid bare. House Calder had built a forced fusion program on a stolen beast and a defect's stolen notes. Every monster on that wall had come out of it. It was theft. It was cruelty. The officials asked the one question the whole case turned on: why the program had failed so catastrophically. Why not one copy had ever obeyed a handler? Verrill answered it in open court, for the first time anyone had ever said it aloud. Because a fused beast imprints on the one who made it, he said. It obeys that one and no other. House Calder seized a beast and stole a method, and neither was ever theirs to command. The seized beast starved rather than serve them. The copies they forced had no maker at all, so they obeyed nothing, and became what we saw on the wall. He closed the ledger. The program was doomed the day it started. They just spent a fortune and a city's safety learning it. The keystone dropped into place. Everyone in that chamber understood at once why Ashwing had come home across the city, why Calder's monopoly had rotted from the inside, why the whole thing had been hollow from the first stamp. The house that owned every bloodline had been caught owning nothing that mattered. The tribunal reconvened that same day, in emergency session, and this time the formality ran the other way. Halric stood for House Calder in his ivory coat, immaculate as ever, and I watched his certainty take its first real crack. He'd walked into this chamber before as a man reading a receipt. Now the receipt was being read back to him, and it didn't balance. His serene courtesy held at the surface, but underneath it something had begun to give. The first dread of a man who's realized the paper isn't on his side anymore. They stripped House Calder of the breeding monopoly on screen, in front of the same gallery that had watched them seize Ashwing. The stamp came down. A century of owning the Empire's bloodlines ended in one afternoon, in the same cold marble room where they'd taken my first beast and called it livestock. Sarah was in the gallery. She'd been there through all of it, silent, uninvited, holding the full weight of one transaction. I saw her watch the monopoly fall, and I watched the question move across her face. What did my price actually buy? The full answer arrived at beat's end, and it landed on two faces at once. Halric turned at last and looked at me. Really looked, the way he never had, not as an inventory error but as a person. And I watched the thing he'd spent his whole life refusing to believe finally reach him. He built everything on one idea, that worth is property, that anything valuable can be owned, that a man who out-owns his rivals has won. He'd bought the beast. He'd bought the notes. He'd bought the informer. He'd owned all of it, legally, completely. And it had all been inert in his hands, because the thing he'd needed was never a beast or a method or a secret. It was a boy, me, whose hands were the only hands any of it would answer to. He couldn't buy that. He'd never been able to buy that. His whole life had bought nothing, because the one thing with value was the one thing that can't be owned, and he was only understanding it now, too late, in the ruin of everything he'd built. I saw it hit him. His face didn't crumble. Men like Halric don't crumble. It just emptied. The certainty going out of it like a light, leaving a man standing in a coat that suddenly meant nothing. He'd inherited the monopoly by out-owning his own siblings, spent his whole life proving that worth was property and property was mastery. If a thing existed that couldn't be bought, then his entire life had bought nothing. He was looking at that thing now, across a courtroom, and it was a stable boy he'd stamped and seized and lost to. And in the same room, in the gallery, Sarah understood the same thing from the other side. Her price hadn't bought her family's restoration, not really. It had bought a caged beast that starved itself faithful, a monopoly in ruins, a duke emptied out in a courtroom, and the end of the one bond she'd had since she was 9. She'd sold the only thing that had ever chosen her freely and gotten the number for it, and now she sat in the wreckage of what the number cost. She didn't weep. She just looked at me across the chamber and let it land. All of it, at once. The story's whole engine sat on those two faces in that moment. Worth was never ownership. Halric learned it having owned everything. Sarah learned it having sold the one thing she couldn't get back. I didn't gloat. There was nothing in me to gloat with. On the tribunal steps after, Pell wanted me to say something, to feel something big, to mark it. He'd earned the right to want it. He'd believed in me loudly when belief was dangerous, held me up on the staging when the mark took my legs, hauled ingredients and run interference through the whole long defiance. He wanted a victory he could shout about. I couldn't give him one. I was hollowed out. The sacrifice on the wall, the family of beasts I'd spent, the marks seared up my arm, a whole season of the mask now finally off my face and unneeded. I just stood in the daylight and breathed. There was nothing left to hide. For the first time since the crystal cracked in the awakening hall, no part of me was performing for anyone. That was the feeling, if it was a feeling. Not triumph. Release. The quiet of setting down a thing you've carried so long you forgot it had weight. Then the registry did the thing I'd been driving toward without letting myself believe it could happen. Faced with a break its certified stock couldn't hold and one solution that had, faced with a program of stolen fusions that had killed defenders on the wall, faced with the plain arithmetic of 100 years of single-line breeding falling behind the rifts, the registry convened on the one-beast law itself. Varel testified. The man who had enforced that law his whole thorough career, who had stamped me a defect's egg, seized my first beast, and signed it over to a duke, stood before the officials. He told them the truth he'd been counting all season. The purebred lines can't hold the brakes, he said. I certified them. I watched them fail on the north wall. And I watched one tamer hold what they couldn't, with beasts the law forbids him to have. He set his ledger on the bench, the whole season's tally. I counted the defenders who died behind the duke's copies. I counted the ones who lived behind the boys. The ledger doesn't balance in the law's favor anymore. It hasn't for years. we just hadn't been made to look. The debate was real. I'll give the registry that. A century of one-beast law doesn't bend in an afternoon just because it's been embarrassed. There were officials who argued the law was the only thing standing between order and 100 defects, each bonding a private army. There were officials who pointed out, not unreasonably, that the last man to be handed unchecked power over new species had built a barn full of monsters that killed defenders on the wall. And there were officials who argued that a class of exactly one, a single fusion tamer, licensed, watched, his every bond recorded, was not an army. It was a solution the Empire could no longer afford to outlaw. They weighed precedent against bodies. They weighed 100 years of order against a break that 100 years of order hadn't held. It went on for days, and the outcome was not a foregone thing. I sat through all of it in the same plain work clothes, not letting myself hope. Hope was a thing I'd learned to ration in that exact building. Sarah ended it. She wasn't called. No one asked her. She stood up in the gallery unprompted on the last day of the debate. She walked to the bench and set down a folder. My fusion notes, the stolen originals, the ones her sale had led Calder's people to pull from my loft. She'd taken them back somehow. Or Calder's fall had shaken them loose. However she'd gotten them, she returned them in open court, and she confirmed the theft in her own voice. I sold him, she said, plainly. No excuse dressed up as a reason. I trained beside Roan since we were 9, and I knew what he was, and I sold it to House Calder to save my family's name. These are his notes. Calder built the program on them. I'm the reason the law could reach him at all. She didn't look at me. She looked at the bench. I can't undo it. I know that. But the record should be true, and this is the true part I can put in it. It didn't erase anything. Her coda wasn't a redemption, and I didn't take it as one. She'd still done what she'd done, the bond was still gone, the number was still cashed. But she took the cost of her transaction, on the record, in front of everyone, when she could have stayed silent in the gallery and let it fade. That was the whole of it. The betrayal answered, not undone. Some things don't get undone, they just get told true at the end. The amendment was signed quietly, the way real things get done, no crowd roar. No fanfare, just a registry chamber and a bench and a document that struck through a century of one-beast law and wrote in its place a single exception, plural bonds, legal, for licensed fusion tamers. A class of exactly one, defined and named in the text itself. The law that had called me a defect at 17 was amended, and my name was in the amendment. That was the whole vindication, delivered in ink in a cold room to a boy who was too tired to do anything but read it twice. The stamp that said defect was void. The clock that had counted toward my culling stopped. The status the crowd had denied me was, at last, simply true on paper. It didn't feel loud. It felt like a weight I'd carried since the awakening hall being set down quietly on a registry desk. They re-registered me the next morning. No gallery, no ceremony. A clerk and a ledger and a new stamp. Ashwing came in at my side, grown now to the scale it had held on the wall, scales and feathers and a crest that lit the office blue when it stretched. The clerk registered it under my name, legally, plurally, the way the amendment now allowed. She pressed a new stamp over the old line in the ledger. Fusion Tamer, licensed. Over the word defect, which someone had written the day my crystal cracked, and which no longer meant anything at all. There was nothing left to conceal. The season of the mask, the canvas, the routes through the drainage cuts, the answer that fit when Veril had no better one, all of it was over. I'd spent a year hiding the greatest secret in the Empire, and now it was a line in the registry ledger, plain as any other. I walked out of the registry into the daylight, and I did the one thing I'd wanted since the beginning. I walked Ashwing down the capital's main street in daylight, not to a crowd. Not to a cheering city. The city had done its cheering on the wall, and this wasn't for them. I walked my beasts down the boulevard the ducal heirs had always paraded their apex mounts down, past the registry that had stamped me worthless, in the plain sun of an ordinary morning. People stopped. Some of them recognized the boy who'd held the wall. Most of them just saw a young tamer walking a beast no bestiary held, openly, legally in the light. That was all I'd ever wanted. To raise the impossible thing I'd made and walk it down the street in daylight, without a canvas, without a warrant coming up the road, without a soul I couldn't afford watching too closely. To not measure my worth by a stamp somebody else pressed on me. Ashwing walked at my side, and the mark on my wrist read Fusion Tamer now instead of defect, and I didn't need the crowd to certify any of it. I knew what I was. I'd known since the crystal cracked warm under my palm and gave me 2 eggs instead of 1. Every tamer born in this empire has a ceiling. I was born with a blueprint, and the Empire finally read it.